right. I think you should be rolling. Okay. So, first and foremost, I want to thank you on behalf of the Missouri Historical Society and the K-12 team at large, who I specifically work with, for agreeing to speak with us and share a little bit of your insight and your knowledge today. We're very appreciative of your time. And I also want to congratulate you on your Lifetime Achievement Award. I saw it
Oh,
on
thank you.
the website. Congratulations.
Thank
Um,
you.
for those who are watching from home, today we are talking to award-winning director Ron Himes, who is founder and producing director of the St. Louis Black Repertory Theater, which creates beautiful productions about the Black experience from the Black perspective. He is also currently the Henry E. Hampton Jr. Artist in Residence at WashU as well. That is a very, very brief bio. Ron has accomplished many, many things in his lifetime, but is there anything important that I might have missed, Ron?
That you are one of my favorite students. We're one of my favorites.
Thank you. See, I'm gonna make sure I add that in, and you can put it on the website too. All right. So the theme of our homeschool day this month for Black History Month is Black arts and culture. And an underlying theme that we are really exploring is this idea that over time, Black arts and culture has traveled and kind of migrated throughout St. Louis, but also throughout the nation and even globally. So with you, I really want to get into the importance of place and kind of space making for Black artists and creatives. And you yourself have been integral in creating space for Black creatives. And I want to know, what was your inspiration and reasoning behind creating the Black Rep?
Well, um, as a teen, a youngster, there was a group in St. Louis called the Black Artist Group. Um, and they were very influential on me. They were a collective of musicians and dancers and theater makers. Um, but also at an early age, probably 12 or 13, um, I really began to hang out on the campus at Washington University. And so as a result, I became exposed to a lot of arts and culture at an early age, also to a lot of political activism. And so I would say that, during my teenage years, I was really politicized and introduced to a lot of art and art making.
So that kind of jumpstarted you and wanted to create your own space?
Well, the thing that happened is after I matriculated from high school and started Washington University, I had friends who were theater majors and were constantly complaining about the lack of opportunities for them in the theater department because the program was not doing any work by Black writers, and they just couldn't figure out how to cast those Black students in the plays that they were doing. And I guess because of my early activism and that I realized and suggested to them that, we paid tuition and that meant that we should have access to facilities on campus. And if the theater department wasn't going to cast them in plays, we should just start doing our own plays. And so we started a student group on campus and really began to do that. I think our first performance was in the formal lounge of the women's building. We did things in Holmes Lounge. We did things in Dorm K. We did things in Graham Chapel. And eventually we began to start performing on other campuses. Black student organizations from other campuses began to call us. And the Black Rep actually grew out of that student group.
So when we don't have our resources, create them. Absolutely. What do you think is the significance? So what would you say is the significance of Black artists being in their own spaces?
I think that, being in our own spaces gives us sort of the freedom and to explore freely and to not be concerned with a white gaze, not be concerned with necessarily concerned with sort of Eurocentric standards and norms, and that we sort of operate from a more collective base, which I think for a lot of us reverts back to our African roots, whether we realize it or not, and that we are creating from a collective for the good of the whole.
That's such a beautiful answer. Sorry, it would take a moment to soak all that in. Okay, my next question is, you've been around for quite a while. You know, I'm not gonna date you right now. But how, or I guess where, where have you witnessed art and culture spreading from St. Louis specifically outward?
Well, I mean, you know, if I just looked at, well, as I mentioned, you know, the Black Artist Group, which was here in St. Louis, I think that they came to a point where they all realized that they needed to leave St. Louis. And particularly, I think that there's a tremendous record of the number of musicians who left St. Louis and moved to New York, for instance, like Bakita Carroll and Oliver Lake and Julius Hemphill and Hamiet Blewett and those guys. But also there have been a number of people who have also now come up through the Black Rep and have gone on to perform regionally, nationally, on Broadway, on television and film. And so I think that, you know, as I said, you know, given an opportunity to train, to develop our talents, to have a place to showcase them, gives us an opportunity to then leave and share them with the universe.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a very common theme for St. Louis specifically. A lot of times I hear artists contributed to maybe like a lack of resources specifically here in St. Louis, but I know they are currently growing. And sometimes there are artists who blow up and become these huge stars, and a lot of people don't even realize that they are from St. Louis until maybe later on down the line. So it's always interesting when we really think about and are able to get into that history of like, some of these people who are really big got their start right here. And so it's just one of those things that we like to think about on our team specifically. How do we uncover that history and tell some of those stories? So one of the questions from one of my team members, they were wondering how you have been able to maintain the Black Rep for so long, speaking of how some of those resources kind of come and go or just aren't around. How have you been able to maintain the resource that you have created for such a long time? And what has that experience been like?
Well, I think the biggest thing has been support from the Black community and you know, and from some from the philanthropic community in St. Louis, but primarily our support has come from our community and our audiences. There are some people who were undergrads at WashU with me who are still coming to the Black Rep. The first building that we had was on St. Louis Avenue and 23rd Street in the 80s. There are still season ticket holders and audience members who have been coming to the theater since then. There are second and third generation people who were the children whose parents brought them to 23rd Street, who now have their own season tickets and continue to come. I think that one of the things that we've done is I've always tried to make sure that we lived within our means, and that, you know, we weren't extravagant in our productions, but that we set high bars of excellence, and that we tried to reach them and continue to raise them with the limited resources that we had, that we did not allow a lack of resources to prohibit or inhibit us from creating.
That is great. I'm hearing a lot of community investment in that, and I think that that's really important, specifically when building Black spaces. Having that community investment is very, very important. And that's something that I learned myself, even being at WashU, as we were trying to get different projects off the ground. Having your people really supporting you is always very, very important. Um, has the pandemic changed the way the Black Rep is building and maintaining that community at all?
Oh, for sure. I mean, like everybody else, we've been unable to perform live. We've been able to keep in touch with our audience, however, virtually. We,
Mhm.
since September, actually, we ended our live performances last March. We were in production of a play, and we had extended it for a week, and we had to cancel it right in the beginning of the extension week, and completely canceled our last production, which would have been last May. And so we spent the summer, we quickly gathered and figured out how to salvage our summer program. So we put a lot of COVID protocol in place. We looked at a lot of CDC and government guidelines, and we were able to host 15 students live and another half a dozen virtually. And we had our summer program that we have every year. We have an intensive summer program that runs for 6 to 8 weeks. It meets from 8 to 5 on Monday through Friday. And the students usually do a culminating performance. Historically, it has been at the Missouri Historical Society, but we weren't able to do that this summer. So we shot their culminating performance and we streamed it. And it was the first performance or production that we streamed. And then when we came back in the fall, we just went into the virtual world like a lot of other companies have done. And since September, we've probably streamed over half a dozen performances, readings, or productions.
Oh, wow. It's so great though that you all were able to pivot. I know so many companies who really thrive off that in-person experience have been struggling with that, but I love hearing that you all have found a way to make it work. Speaking of teams, I love that there's that intensive program. I wasn't aware of that before I actually looked at the website recently. But we also have a program called Teams Make History, where St. Louis teams work together at the museum, and they develop different exhibits as well as theater productions in order to tell St. Louis's history. And so I'm wondering, what advice would you give to them, as well as any other students who are watching, who are looking for ways to create their own safe spaces and tell their own stories? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I'm very familiar with that program. As I said, we've spent a lot of time over there, and I think have done some things with that group. The thing I think is set up well. I think that the research that they do is so very, very important. Understanding where you come from has a tremendous impact on realizing where you are and how to get where you want to go. And so understanding our history, celebrating it, lifting it up, I think is the advice I would give young people.
So do your research and celebrate that history. Yes, you can't know where you are going. This is one of my favorite quotes. You cannot know where you are going if you don't know where you have been.
Right.
That is so true. So those are all the questions that I have for you, Ron. Do you have any last thoughts that you wanted to share out before I go ahead and wrap it up?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I want to congratulate you on, your success as a Washington University student and alum, and, wish you well at the museum and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, Ron. I'll be reaching out. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. On
All
behalf of the
right.
Missouri Historical Society, again, I want to thank you, thank you, thank you, and be on the lookout for this interview on the website.
All right. Take good care.
All right, you as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.